I would like to yield my time to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Congressman Labanfa, and I want to say thank you, Chair Hageman and Chairman Westerman, for holding this critical hearing regarding Puerto Rico. And I'll say critical because the continuing instability of the electrical grid is a roadblock to our economic development on the island. And it's a threat to the public safety and to the mental and physical health of my constituents as well. Even though the House has canceled votes today and members have left for their districts, Mr. Chairman, you have demonstrated your commitment to the island and our residents by keeping this hearing at schedule, all while others are more interested in photo ops and a good headline. I also want to thank Chair Hageman and my colleagues who are here today, even when votes are not called. The Committee on Natural Resources is the committee with jurisdiction over Puerto Rico and the rest of the U.S. territories. Refusing to testify at this hearing is a clear disregard, not just to the committee or to me as the only member representing the island, elected from the island in U.S. Congress, but also, more important, to my constituents. We will have preferred to have Secretary Granholm here, who was repeatedly invited to this hearing, to have made herself available to provide testimony at this hearing, whose intent is to oversee the federal funding that we in Congress have approved to several federal agencies that are illegally led by the Department of Energy. As the principal agency tasked with our nation's energy production and policies, to execute an action plan that guarantees reliable, safe, and affordable electricity on the island. And I am not the only one saying this. The President tasked the Secretary Granholm as the lead, personally, in Puerto Rico a few months ago in Ponce, and I was there as well. Subsequently, I must think that her willful and misguided decision to be absent from this hearing has caused to also have absences from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Federal Emergency and Management Agency, FEMA. This is an issue that must be treated with all the seriousness and urgency that it deserves from all public officials tasked with this matter, and all the energy sector stakeholders as well. I wish I could sit here and tell you it was an issue of the past, but it's not. And I will be lying to you. Hurricane Irma Maria in 2017 revealed the weak condition of the Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure. That's the reality. We suffered months of power outages in rural areas for almost a year. The earthquakes in the Southwest in 2020 reminded us that this tragic reality, as well as the daily outages my constituents continue to suffer. The reality is that 7 years later, blackouts and brownouts still affect our everyday life. That's the reality on the island. The system can barely meet demand, and any spike brings it down. This past month alone, we saw numerous outages affecting hundreds of thousands of customers for long hours, days, and days on end. You cannot run a business like this. You cannot have a stable and safe home like this. Schools, hospitals, every sector on the island is affected by the unpredictability of our electricity system. Our legacy plants are still being run to their limits and deferring maintenance, increasing the risk of failing before they can be replaced. The transmission and distribution system is still overloaded and missing basic redundancies in power lines. All that despite total obligations for recovery for almost $17 billion from different sources, including over $11 billion between FEMA and HUD for permanent rebuilding announced at the end of 2020. However, almost 4 years later, the most optimistic estimate from the government of Puerto Rico shows specific projects approved. Construction stage barely add up to 10% of the permanent work fund obligations. My time expired this time, but I will continue to raise the voice of the people of Puerto Rico in this committee. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Member and Vice Chairman Gonzalez-Colon for holding this hearing today. I wish to yield all of my time to Representative Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, my friend. I've been hearing the questions of members of this committee, and I believe everybody here are on the same page in terms of the contract of Luma have not been serving the people of Puerto Rico. You got 1 year of a transitional contract, and then it got into effect. And meanwhile, the utility operators need to remember that that you were contracted to provide better service and not excuses. And what I see here is that people of Puerto Rico already have it with Luma. It's been a long time, and we have not seen any change. Actually, worse. Mr. Saka, you mentioned that waivers will speed up Luma's work. To this date, what waivers do you already requested?
Specifically as it relates to environmental, as you know.
When do you submit those waivers?
Excuse me?
When do you submit those waivers?
We have not submitted.
You have not submitted any waivers to any federal or state agency,
Federal.
but you did not.
We have not
You
submitted
have not.
a request
So
for any
you're
waivers.
asking for waivers here, but you have not submitted or requested any official waiver, and that's your answer. What permits has Luma requested from federal agencies that are currently pending, and when did Luma request it?
So at this point, we have submitted for pending obligation 217 projects. Luma continues on a daily basis to work with the different
Which
agencies.
permits you submitted already?
So we have submitted multiple permits that are associated specifically with each
Madam
project.
Chair, I will ask the witness to submit to the committee a list of the permits that Luma has requested or filed during the term. You have had 3 years, correct?
Luma started June of 2021.
And it's 2024. So you do the math. You've been 3 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you told us here in 2021 that you were already ready on day one, but you were not. And I don't think you're going to be ready in 1,000 years. The reality here is that you have never begun your process in the island. I think just last month you went to PREP to ask to have customers pay a rate increase to cover up an upward revision on capital expenditures to $1,200 million from $110 million that the PREP House had already approved. And I want to ask you, Mr. Saka, exactly why should the customers give more money to an operator who is not delivering on what the people of Puerto Rico contracted you for?
The first obligation that Luma received was in May of 2022. Progress has been made since then. I have, 7 very specific items that I can mention. One of them is the
Why the customer should give you more money if you have not delivered?
I believe that, as mentioned earlier, there is a need for investment on the operational side to keep up with reliability. That's a fact from an industry perspective. The fact that PREPA has not exited bankruptcy is a huge problem because the people of Puerto Rico should not be paying for an increase as it should be financed by going to the markets.
Mr. Saka, to the questions of Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you were saying that because PREPA is not out of the bankruptcy situation, you technically can do whatever you want. That was my impression of your answer. So how come Luma is constantly going to PREP to ask for more? When you enter a contract, not knowing what you really needed to operate, you knew the condition of the system, you knew the situation of PREPA, you knew the situation after the hurricanes. Did you misrepresent the information you gave to the government of Puerto Rico about your liquidity and cash flow to get the contract awarded?
I think it's very important for the people of Puerto Rico to understand one very specific, simple fact. Luma has not asked for a raise. This happens constantly that people are saying that Luma has raised rate. Since Luma started, it stayed with its commitment of not raising rates. What happens is fuel costs change. Luma has nothing to do with fuel costs, does not purchase fuel, does not benefit from that process. Luma has not raised rates one time, and as a matter of fact, the rates that you're talking about have also gone down 7 times since Luma has been there. Again, has nothing to do with Luma. It has to do with the cost of fuel.
Mr. Saka, did you misrepresent the information you gave the government of Puerto Rico about your liquidity and cash flow to get the contract awarded? Yes or no?
Luma has not misrepresented any information provided to the government of Puerto Rico.
My time expires, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm going to call on Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Hageman. Access to affordable, reliable electricity is something all Americans need and something all Americans deserve. The increasing challenges that the people of Puerto Rico have faced in recent years are the result of mismanagement and lack of investing spanning several decades, which has only been exacerbated by natural disasters in recent years. I want to thank the chairwoman for calling this hearing, as well as commend the leadership of my friend and colleague, Representative González Colón, for her steadfast commitment to addressing these challenges on behalf of her constituents. Accordingly, I want to yield my rest of my time to Representative González Colón. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stover. I want to make a question to PREP. We know that in prior occasions, PREP has refused adjustments submitted by Luma. Does the PREP reaffirm that the capital expenditure budget should be $110 million instead of the $200 million? No, I'm talking to PREP.
Yes, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. You refuse adjustments submitted by Luma in prior occasions. And does you reaffirm that the capital expenditure budget should be $110 million instead of $200 million?
Yes, we approve the budgets for all the 3 entities, PREPA, Genera, and Luma, and we make an evaluation of the projects and the line items, and that's how we approve those projects.
So you believe it's 110 instead of 200?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe it's appropriate that an operator who is not delivering on their end of the deal should continue to ask for rate increases?
Luma has not requested a rate increase. What they have requested is reconciliation of the fuel cost adjustment and the power purchase adjustment, and that comes from Genera, the request of the fuel cost. And what we do is we analyze those requests and those documents, and then we make a determination if they apply or don't apply.
Do you or your agency keep track and a timeline of Luma's compliance or lack of thereof with the Puerto Rico energy policy?
Yes, we do keep with their compliance with our orders that we issue.
I mean, in the case of Puerto Rico, just to make the record clear, the Energy Information Agency statistics show that Puerto Rico, the system average interruption duration index is 2020. Under PREPA, because everybody is talking about PREPA, 3 years after Maria was 1,243 minutes, the interruption, the average interruption. And in 2023, under Luma, and another 3 years later, it was 1,448 minutes. It's over 4 times the national index, even 4 years with major disasters, and more than that before you took the administration of the grid. The same statistics shows that the system average interruption frequency index is about 7.8 per customer per year, 7 times the U.S. median. Anyone in Puerto Rico will tell you their experience just in August. And this is a question to you, Mr. Saka. Do you really believe that you're delivering the service that you were contracted to deliver? Yes or no?
I think it's important to put into context that we cannot ignore.
The context is, do you believe that you're delivering the service you were contracted for? Yes or no?
Progress is being made every day. We continue to address vegetation. We have installed automated devices.
I will take that as a no. And because at least you're not meeting the consumer's expectations. question will be, who are you accountable to? Who's supposed to keep and follow the metrics of your contract compliance?
Luma is the most regulated utility that I know of in the entire United States. We have
Who you
our
are account-
contract obligation
to
with
who you are accountable to?
P3A for the contract obligations.
P3?
With the regulator, the
PREB.
for any of the regulatory matters. In addition to that, of course, there's the FOMB that, is part of that process.
So
And-
those three are your bosses. They're supposed to be the ones with the power to make you comply. P3, PREP, and FOMB.
Correct.
And I think my time has expired, Madam Chair.
Well, I'm going to call on Ms. Gonzalez Colon for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Saka, of permanent work projects under FEMA or CDBG that your company has submitted for approval, what total amount do they represent?
What we have submitted for approval?
Yes.
Okay, so we've submitted 12.3 billion in projects. Out of those, in execution or already completed is 2.3 billion, or about 18% of the 12.3 billion.
How much has been approved by FEMA?
So we have been reimbursed 173 million. We also have received 418 million of working capital advances.
Yeah, but that's another thing. So you just received 173 million
173 million have been reimbursed.
reimbursed. And how much has been approved?
So we have in obligations about $171 projects obligated and approved.
How much money you've been approved? If you don't have the data, please
One-
submit it.
1.1 billion.
1.1 billion.
1.1 billion, correct.
So you submitted 12.3 billion in projects, and you only been approved 1.1 billion. How much has your company spent out of pocket?
So we have spent 1.3 billion. We have 552 million spent pending obligation. Another 352 million submitted in RFPs, in our RFRs.
How much actual expenditure has your company billed for you to obtain reimbursement?
So we have incurred in cost 1.3 billion.
So you have not billed for the rest of the 11 billions that you asked for projects. How much has been actually paid out? The 173 million and the 400 million for capital expenditures?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How much is actually being paid out?
Okay, so out of the 1.3 billion of cost incurred, we have paid out to suppliers around $1 billion.
Mr. Lavoy from Core 3, do your numbers coincide with their numbers?
No, some of the numbers are not necessarily the ones that
Can
we
you
have.
clarify?
Yes, so first, I need to recognize that there's been some improvements on the Genera
That's
Luma
not the
side.
question. I'm asking you
Yes.
about the numbers.
So far, FEMA has obligated $5.8 billion total for the electrical grid. Of those, the majority are for transmission and distribution, for engineering and architectural services, and also to purchase equipment in advance. Of that, like Mr. Saka said, 171 are related to Luma, of which the majority have requested an advance of money related to the working capital advance. Of the 300 plus million that Luma has mentioned about requests for reimbursements, the immense majority are related to reconcile advances. So it's only about $10 million actual numbers for new money to be reimbursed.
Thank you. Mr. Saka, we keep talking about the vegetation clearing, and we have these discussions before. And Luma repeatedly speak about that there are $1.2 billion set aside for that from FEMA. But the reality is only $18 million are being approved, hasn't it?
We have one project obligated, which is around 18 million. There should be another 5 projects that will be obligated between now and the end
But
of the
right
year.
now, today, just $18 million has been approved, hasn't it?
That is correct.
That's
For the first project, which is San Juan.
So from $1.2 billion that you're claiming FEMA approved, just $18 million are being approved. Has Luma obligated the $1.2 billion for clearing vegetation?
So we've only have one project obligated. We estimate that the total cost will be $1.2 billion. And for everyone's just reminding is that the way it works is that nothing is really approved by FEMA until you submit the documentation in order to be reimbursed.
Before my time expired, when you contracted with Puerto Rico, you knew that we are a tropical island, I assume, and that in a tropical island, it rains almost every day. So the vegetation will grow. And when you're saying you're going to be doing a clearing of the vegetation for 3 years, we're not taking into account the maintenance the system and the lines need to have in order not to have vegetation crossing the lines. $1.2 billion clearing vegetation. It's like once you cut the tree, it's not going to grow again in a few weeks on the island. That's not real. So again, I think the people of Puerto Rico had it with you, with your company. I had it too. I think Luma should go. Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the chair now calls on Mr. Valadeo for 5 minutes of questioning.
I would like to yield my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon to continue her line of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valadao. A few minutes ago, we were talking about, and my interpretation was that people from Genera were saying that we're having 50% oil and 50% LNG as a production, and I need to correct the record. The Energy Information System Agency for 2022 said that 63% of the island generation is oil, 23% is gas, 8% is coal, and 6% renewables. That's the data of 2022. So I just need to correct the record in terms of it's not 50% LNG and not 50% oil. Is that correct?
Thank you for your question. I am very familiar with the stats that you're giving, so let's go with that. Just to clarify, what I was speaking about was as to the 60%.
Are those the numbers of 2022? The
Yes.
ones that you gave?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
And in that renewables of 6% at a time, I believe 7% at this time, 2.8 are from photovoltaic power, 2.1 for hydro, and 1.75% wind. Is that correct? That's the composition of the renewables right now.
Yes.
And you understand as well that the law in Puerto Rico, Law 19 Act, places some percentage of energy renewables goals for the year 2025, 2024, 2050. For 2025, it says renewables should be 40%. My question will be, with the current statistics on renewable, with 7%, is Puerto Rico going to meet the 40% goal for the next year? Yes or no?
Thank you for your question. I do not believe it will.
Okay. The law says as well that 60% of renewables should be reached to 2040. At the current percentage of 7% of renewables, do you believe that we're going to achieve the goal in 2040 of having 60% of renewables?
I don't believe you will.
So I'm going to make the same question will be in the 2050, 100% of renewables. No, the answer is no. In order to get, and I believe everybody here wants renewables, I want renewables as well. I mean, everybody should move to a cleaner energy for the sake of the island. Most of the people who actually go to that goal of renewables transition with LNG to get there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How much really the people of Puerto Rico and Genera can move to LNG in the next 3-4 years to get the maximum capacity of generation going from oil, from burning bunker C oil to LNG? How much is really achievable in your perspective?
Thank you for your question. I think in a situation where people are aligned and working together on sort of a common plan, in a 4-year period, I believe that you can get rid of the diesel and the HFO that is being burned currently, and that you will move to a situation where you can power the dispatchable generation on natural gas.
How much it will take to construct a new plant, a new LNG plant in Puerto Rico? How long it would take? Getting all the permitting, the filing. Do you actually, let me rephrase my question. Have you submitted any permitting request to any federal or local agency for construction of a new plant in Puerto Rico?
Thank you for your question. We have submitted permit requests for the conversion of existing.
Which one?
Absolutely. The what people would refer to as the megagens in Palo Seco,
When do you submit that?
Mayaguez, and then Cambalache as well.
3. So you submitted 3 change, Cambalache, Mayaguez, and Palo Seco.
That's correct. To the various authorities, PREB included, as well as
And the federal agencies as well.
local permitting agencies.
And when do you submitted those requests?
I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but I can get them to you. But in the past 4 months.
In the past 4 months.
That's correct.
And how much is the average of construction saying that those permits were granted and approved? How much will take the actual construction or conversion of those plants from burning sea oil to LNG?
Thank you for your question. With respect to the megagens, 0. So if there were a piece of paper today that from the regulatory authorities saying that it was okay to operate on natural gas, then tomorrow you could have the megagens operate on natural gas and no longer burn diesel at approximately a $17 million savings per year.
You're talking about the 3 plants, Cambalache, Mayaguez, and Palo Seco. So if you are approved tomorrow those plants can be converted.
So specifically, I was referring to the one at Palo Seco. With respect to Mayaguez and Cambalache, between the two, it's a 6-month process. So for example, if you received the paper that you needed today, then in a 6-month period, all 3 would be done, and the annual savings for that would be approximately $72 million a year to the ratepayers of Puerto Rico forever.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, and also like to thank the subcommittee for holding this important hearing. It's obvious and imperative that reliable, affordable energy is delivered to residents and territories. The territories, as I've heard many times now today, are often have a high cost of fuel, right? And the territories often face high cost and low reliability. And load shedding is all too common experience both in Puerto Rico and in Guam as a territory. I want to also thank the panel for their questions that they answered for us. But I think it's clear that, first off, we've got to get rid of this red tape, cut down the vegetation right away. Second, we got to go back to increasing the generation as soon as possible. And it's obvious we got to gasify just part of that, of the electric grid through new LNG terminals and gas-fired generations. Get that done as quickly as possible. And why? Because we're praying that the next storm doesn't come. And unless we get this done right away, I don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's important that we continue this conversation, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time.
Would you yield just a minute or so to me?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moreland. LNG exports had an impact on Puerto Rico? Were you aware that the Biden-Harris administration has imposed a moratorium on LNG exports from the United States? Were you aware of that?
Madam Chair, if I may, Puerto Rico does not export LNG. We
Okay, but
import.
we've talked about that, being able to, I'm just asking if that moratorium has had an impact on Puerto Rico. No?
Thank you for your question. I'm happy to field that. I think two important distinctions. One, I think any restriction of LNG exports from the United States, sort of by definition, increases the price of LNG in the market because there's less supply. So in that respect, I think there's a negative impact. I think the other impact that's sort of worth calling out is the Jones Act restriction that prevents U.S. LNG from ending up in Puerto Rico. Okay. So at the current moment, there is no U.S. LNG that ends up in Puerto Rico, which I think also has a negative price impact to the ratepayers of Puerto Rico.
Okay, but the price of LNG has gone up with this moratorium.
I think it's fair to say that with less supply in the market, that the worldwide prices would be higher otherwise.
Thank you. I yield back to Mr. Moylan.
Madam Chair.
And I yield to my colleague Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Moylan. We've been talking here, Prep and Genera, about the capacity of the generation on the island. Puerto Rico may face 18 to 24 months of being short of peak capacity reserve until the new installations are completed. Therefore, the island needs fast development of reliable generation capacity to meet the full demand now. I know that additional mobile LNG units will be the fastest for short term. However, it is true they will have lesser economy of scale. And this alternative also mean to fast track the removal of one of the more existing obsolete units and installing new technology units integrated with batteries for stabilization and backup in the same footprint of the old units. And even when Puerto Rico may fast-track its own permitting, will this require a federal champion to clear hurdles from federal regulations? There's other options that are being explored. The P3's authorities is evaluating a 300 megawatts project for LNG and hydrogen and flex fuel plant. And the Department of Energy Loan Projects Office has also supported initiative for private central utility scale storage and renewables for one of the existing private generators, IS. How is this need being addressed, and how we do not make the people of Puerto Rico wait for 2 years for having stable electricity? And this question is for Genera. Are there any plans that can be put into motion now so we don't lack of generation in the next months?
Thank you for your question. I will start by saying the number one issue that we talk about in Genera every day is how to increase reliable generation today. I think it's very clear how to do it long term, but how do you do it today? So I would say specifically, there is a tool available. The Army Corps has a $5 billion contract that they put in place specifically targeted at Puerto Rico, under which they are able to deploy fast power. The Army Corps also successfully did it in 2022 and 23, 350 megawatts in a 120-day period. I would note that one of the biggest reasons that it was so fast is because there was a high degree of coordination with the federal agencies, in particular EPA and some of the other issues that we've been talking about today, to have a very streamlined process. So as a strategy matter, you can replicate the exact project that was done earlier using an existing vehicle and an existing mechanism with the same team, and you can potentially deploy
Chair,
565
time expired.
megawatts, which would cover the gap in capacity for a 24-month period until new resources were available.
The chair now recognizes Representative Jimenez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Carlos Jimenez. I represent Florida's 28th Congressional District, which is parts of Miami and the Keys. And it's the closest congressional district on the continental United States to the island of Puerto Rico. Also represent about 70% Hispanics in my district, many of which come from the island. And I'm here to support my dear friend, Congresswoman Jenniffer González of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is an essential part of the United States of America, and we're so proud of the countless contributions of the Puerto Rican people to our nation and the island's strategic role as a gateway to the Caribbean and the region. The over 3 million U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico deserve reliable energy. It's why I support Congresswoman González's push for more federal support and oversight of the island's electrical grid. Disruptions in service cause harm to businesses, increase operating costs, and are costly for the thousands of families who have to rely on generators as a source of power. We have allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to modernize and rebuild Puerto Rico's power grid in the aftermath of hurricanes, earthquakes, and natural disasters that have devastated the island in recent years. The people of Puerto Rico are proud Americans, and America must fully invest and must be fully invested and committed to the successful economic development of the island. A reliable, modern, and sustainable power grid is a crucial part of it. Por eso apoyo los esfuerzos de nuestra congresista Jenniffer González para resolver el problema de mejorar el sistema energético en la isla. Jenniffer es una gran líder que respetamos en el Congreso porque lucha por el pueblo de Puerto Rico y nos educa sobre cómo podemos seguir ayudando a los 3 millones de ciudadanos americanos que viven en la isla. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time to Ms. González.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez, and thank you for always supporting Puerto Rico in all legislations. I have a question for Mr. Saka. Luma, as the transmission and distribution operator, must be lead in developing any updates to the Integrated Resources Plan, which must be revised every 3 years. And this was due on June 28th of this year. But your company requested an extension to May 2025 and conceded that extension to November 28th of 2024 for the preliminary submission and February 28th of next year to complete the IRP. My question, Mr. Saka, will be, when the last IRP was approved in 2021, it was known that it needed to be renewed in 2024. What's the excuse not to be ready for?
Thank you for your question. The IRP is a process that requires quite a bit of data gathering, quite a bit of interaction with multiple stakeholders, and quite a bit of technology in order to be able to address a very complex situation, whether it's the generation aspect of it, the transmission and distribution system, and how to make it more effective. Along the way, we have found that it's been quite difficult to get all of the data to make sense and requires a bit more study.
Even when the millions of dollars in contract. So to the prep, what will be the consequences to Luma if the deadline is not met?
Last week, we had a technical conference to discuss the reasons why they can't comply with that November 29 deadline. I can't answer that question because right now we're deliberating our response to that.
But what's the consequences of not complying with the deadline?
It could be either fines for not complying with our order, and that would be the main consequence. And delaying, of course, the IRP process.
Mr. Lavoie, how much has PREPA and Core 3 fronted from Luma projects that must be recovered by FEMA?
So far, we have disbursed about $1.3 billion of authorized money based on FEMA obligations.
How much more is still pending to be recovered?
Say that again, please.
How much is still pending to be recovered?
So we can disperse based on two things. Number one, FEMA obligating scopes of work that are submitted by Luma and Genera. Once that happens, we have authorization to actually
How much still
disperse.
pending? You don't have don't have the number here. You can submit it to the committee.
No, we
How
do.
much is left in terms of reserve?
Madam Chair. Time has
We
My-
can just,
my-
well, I
my
will allow
time-
the witness to answer, but then we need to wrap up.
Okay, so for the things that we manage the federal funds, right? FEMA has obligated $9.5 billion, but duly authorized for construction and disbursements is $5.8 billion. Of that, we have advanced pretty much 26% based on the request from Luma and Genera.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I will submit questions for the record.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.